get you the books that you need for those classes there. So make sure to do that. And then this Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, we're having the Community Blitz. Jeremy will be taking care of that, leading that, but we'll go out into Kings Mills proper, and we will be passing out, actually hanging out on the doors, these door hangers all over Kings Mills, and then whatever you have left over, we will go ahead and take them home and canvass your neighborhood for Easter, inviting people to be here for our Good Friday gathering and our Easter Sunday gathering as well. So make plans to be a part and involved in these things. It's a great opportunity to reach into our community and get people to come and be a part with us here. So be a part, be involved with these outreach opportunities and these ways to minister with one another. All right, let's turn in our Bibles tonight to Genesis 1. Genesis 1. As we continue our series we started last week, and just to catch you up, we are going through a study, I'm using a curriculum that is based on this book right here. It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I highly recommend this book. I said that last week. What we are teaching here is a very, very basic overview. This goes into great depth of the things we are discussing. So I highly recommend this book. There's a lot of science in it, so beware. Those of you that are into science, you're going, beware about what? I love this stuff. But no, it's extremely good. It's a great approach. They do a fantastic job of handling the subject matter in which we are discussing here, but they'll take you even further in depth into the study, the scientific research that was done, and the results that come from it. And so I highly recommend get a copy of this for your library, read it. It will be beneficial to you as well. So tonight we're continuing this particular study, and our subject tonight, we're going to start into, remember we talked about 4 questions last week when we got started. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are the miracles real? And then can we trust the New Testament? Those are 4 basic questions that we want to discuss when we deal in the subject of apologetics, which is defending what we believe. And so we answered, or we addressed the question last week of, does truth exist? We talked about truth must exist. Truth is true no matter what. It's true for all people in all places at all times. Truth must exist. It gives us a baseline to go off of. So once we've established, now that we've established, yes, you can know truth. Truth is knowable. We have a baseline. Now we can jump into this bigger question here. Does God exist? Now that we know, okay, we can look at things and say, this is true, this is truth. That allows me to take principles to answer the question, does God exist? So we're going to take this particular question over several weeks. This is not going to be done tonight. That's a big question. 3 words posing a huge question. So we're going to look in the beginning tonight. Does God exist in the beginning? And as we go through this, an astronomer, Arthur Eddington, made this statement: the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. Statements like this are huge. For astronomers to make statements that as they study the universe, as they study the galaxies, the stars, our solar system, to come away from that and say, you cannot separate the beginning from a supernatural force being involved. There's got to be something that's equivalent to them admitting God exists. And so we're going to look at a lot of things, statements and research and things that actually address this kind of mindset. And interestingly, a lot of these individuals, their purpose in studying these things was to disprove God, which I always find fascinating, and I always think that it's hilarious because you have historians that have gone out trying to disprove the Bible using archaeology only to come back and say, well, the Bible's true. And then you have astronomers and scientists going out trying to disprove God using science, and they come back saying, well, I can't help but say that there has to be something out there. And for them to at least say there's something out there is huge. So we start with Genesis 1:1. So let's start at the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So we have a presupposition posed right off for us. Actually, here the Bible states it as fact. In the beginning, God. God created. That indicates that the universe had to have a beginning. Atheists, Gnostics, agnostics, and so on will tell you that the universe is infinite, that it did not have a beginning. And we'll address that tonight as we go through this. They'll tell you it did not have a beginning. So as we go forward from here, remember, does truth exist? Yes. To deny it is a self-defeating claim. And so what we're going to do is we're going to begin to look at the scientific evidence that points to God. So let's start off with the question here, what kind of God? Because the reality is, we worship the God of the Bible, true God, a theistic God. But there are other peoples around the world that believe that they worship God. You have pantheists. You have these other groups out there that believe they worship God. So what kind of God are we talking about tonight? What kind of God are we dealing with? We're going to start as we look at the three major religious worldviews. The first one is theism. This is us. We believe, we hold to theism. God made everything. And this is, Jews believe this, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They believe that God made everything. Then you have pantheism. God is everything. This is Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, the New Age movement. That's the other worldview when you approach God. And then you have this third one, which is religious humanism or atheism, is what we would call this. And they say there's no God at all. The reality is that they worship man. They worship self as an atheist. That to say there is no God, they make themselves God, in essence, because you can't have no God. Everybody's worshiping something. Everybody believes something. Everybody's placing faith in something, whether they want to admit it or not. And so these are the three major religious worldviews. We are obviously going to take the theism approach, the theistic approach. God made everything. We're going to look at creation, where everything came from, as we try to answer the question, as we endeavor to answer the question, does God exist? So there are three great arguments that we want to look at, that we need to discuss when we think of a theistic God. When we think of our religious worldview, there are three arguments that we're going to consider, not all three this week. This is going to be stretched out over a time period. But we see the beginning coming, and this is the cosmological argument, not the cosmetological. So we're not talking about your makeup, ladies. We're talking about the cosmological. Cosmos is the Greek word, the world. Where did we come from? Where did we have our beginning? Is there creation? That's what we're going to be looking at tonight, this beginning, this cosmological argument, not cosmetological. Cosmological argument. And then you have design, the teleological argument. This would reflect to the argument or the discussion about if there is a watch, there must be a watchmaker. So this is the teleological argument that we will look at another time, not tonight. And then the third argument is the moral argument. There are other arguments that we could get into as we discuss the existence of God. But these are the three major ones. These are the three main arguments, and it's interesting when you listen to these guys answer questions or debate and things, oftentimes they'll go back and forth with people on the cosmological and the teleological argument, but when you start discussing morality and where does morality come from, where does our standard of morality come from, that's where people get hung up. They can't answer. So that's interesting, because you would think that we've got all this scientific proof. That should be enough, but people are still going to argue with you. There are some people that will not listen to you. No matter how much proof you give them, they will not listen to you. So what do? We move on to somebody who will listen. We pray for them, but we move on and we go to somebody who will listen to us. So as we get in to this cosmological argument, here's basically what the cosmological argument says. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. So if you had a beginning, I had a cause. There was something that caused me. My car had a beginning. It had a cause. Somebody made it. It had a beginning to it. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now people will argue this. People will say, but the universe is infinite. It did not have a beginning. We're going to answer that tonight. We're going to try to answer that question tonight. So bear with me, fasten your seatbelts, and hang on to your hats as we go into this evening. So the cosmological argument, scientists have stated about the beginning. Here's Stephen Hawking. Everybody knows the name Stephen Hawking. So even Stephen Hawking made the statement, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, we don't believe the Big Bang like the world teaches it. We believe the Big Bang in that we know who caused the bang to happen that made everything come into existence when God spoke and there it was. Bang, there it was. Okay. Stephen Hawking himself has stated that most people are going to agree now that the universe had to have a beginning. It's not infinite. It had to have a beginning. Another great astronomer, an atheistic astronomer, he said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. These are huge statements for individuals like these two men to be making. Because you have one who, major atheist, Stephen Hawking, and you have Lincoln, I believe he was a pretty strong agnostic at best. And he would be called an atheistic agnostic. So either God created us or we created God. There had to be some sort of a beginning. And if we created God, then there's no ultimate meaning or purpose to life. If we created God. So he's our own mental construct, he's a social construct, as a lot of people would propose, then that leaves us with no purpose for life. There's no objective right or wrong, which that leads us into the moral argument. And it doesn't matter how we live because we're just going to return to dust anyway, and we're completely on our own. So it leaves a big problem, and it leaves a big hole in a lot of thought processing if God did not exist before, or God does not exist. It leaves a big problem. Because we could take the argument here and we could say, if God does not exist, then there's no moral objective right or wrong, and everybody can just do whatever they want because what's good for me is good for me, and if you don't like it, too bad, then people would have to make statements like, well, we could not justifiably say statements like Hitler was wrong. Because that could have been right for him, and who am I to say what was right for him? Because there's no moral standard. You're your own moral standard. You see the problem? The problem that faces. So there's got to be a moral standard somewhere. Where does that moral standard come from? Can't be me, because I'm flawed human. Can't be you, because you're flawed human. Must be God. We'll dive deeper into that in later studies. However, if God created us, then there is an ultimate meaning and purpose to life. The Creator has put us here for a reason. How do we know there was a creation? How do we know the universe had a beginning? And how do we know that the beginner was God? And although we don't physically see God because He is not a material being, which is part of the characteristics that makes Him God, that He's immaterial, we know that He exists by His effects. One effect appears to be the universe itself. And this argument for God's existence here, again, is known as the Cosmological Argument. And so here we have this statement. Everything had a beginning, had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore it had a cause. So then we can move further on here. There are 5 reasons, 5 things that we can look to, and we'll look at tonight. These will be kind of our main focus this evening. 5 lines of scientific evidence. For many years, scientists thought that the universe was eternal. We'll talk about this in a few moments, but even Einstein, when he was setting out on his study of the theory of relativity, he was actually very disappointed to come to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning. He wanted the universe to be infinite in his study and his approach. He was highly disappointed with the discovery that he found, which then led to the theory of relativity that we have today, which was a major step in our understanding of things. In the last century, these 5 lines of scientific evidence have come to light, showing that the universe did have a beginning. Scientists call it the Big Bang. We call it creation. Now, there's a difference between the evidence for the Big Bang and the naturalistic Big Bang theory supported by atheists. And we're going to get to that when we discuss the age of the universe at some point. So let's look at these 5 lines here. And it's an acronym. It can be represented by the acronym that is SURGE. You may have seen this acronym before. SURGE. 5 lines of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. So here's what they stand for. S is the second law of thermodynamics. That's basic science. We learned that. I learned it in elementary school, the second law of thermodynamics. U is the universe is expanding. That's an important one. The universe is expanding. That means at one point it started, and it's like a ripple in a pond. When you drop a rock into a pond, the ripples are going to expand outward. There's a point of origin that causes it to expand out. The universe is expanding. If the universe was infinite, had always been, it would be staying put. There wouldn't be a radiation outward, which leads us to the third one, the radiation afterglow. The radiation afterglow, that's the remnant heat from the initial creation that was put out there. The great galaxy seeds is G. And then, of course, E, you can probably guess, is Einstein's general relativity. Einstein's general relativity. So let's get going. Let's dive into these tonight, and I'll try to move relatively quick tonight. Not Einstein relatively quick, but I'll try to move relatively quick this evening. So we start with S, surge, the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is running down, it's running out of usable energy. So we know that the second law of thermodynamics says that the universe is running out of energy. There's a finite amount of energy in the universe as it is being used up. And so this law, also referred to as the law of entropy, it means that the universe is moving toward disorder rather than order. Evolution would say that we are moving into a more orderly state, but that violates the second law of thermodynamics. Everything tends to disorder as it continues to go on. This means that the universe is moving towards this disorder rather than order. It's falling apart over time, much like a car or a building falls apart over time. The second law of thermodynamics ensures that nature will turn a building into a pile of bricks, but it will not turn a pile of bricks into a building. It doesn't run in reverse. You can't throw a pile of bricks out there and poof, have another building out there. It doesn't work that way. So the second law of thermodynamics stating then that the universe is running out of usable energy, and as time goes on, the amount of usable energy is decreasing like the batteries in a flashlight that is left on. Just like the flashlight had to be turned on a finite time ago for it to still have energy, the universe had to have a beginning, a finite time ago to still have energy. Since we still have some order left, just like we still have some usable energy left, the universe cannot be eternal. There had to be a point of origin. Because if it were eternal, we would have reached complete disorder by now. Entropy would prove this. And so this also points to if we're running down, somebody had to wind it up to start it, right? So who started it in order for it to be going so long and running out of energy over all this time? There had to be a winder out there. And so the second law of thermodynamics points to, since we're running down, since the universe is running out of usable energy over this time, there must have been a point when the energy began, when things were wound up. So the second law of thermodynamics is the first point to the universe having a beginning. The universe is expanding. You have Edwin Hubble here, the great Hubble telescope that we are all aware of and we all learned about. That's Edwin Hubble. That's his telescope there. The universe is expanding. If time were reversed, the universe would collapse back into nothing. Because the universe is expanding, if it were reversed, we'd go back into nothing. In 1929, Edwin Hubble, that you see there on the screen, observed a red shift in the light from distant galaxies. That red shift that he saw indicated that the galaxies are all moving away from one another. In other words, the universe is expanding. They're not just static where they are, staying there all the time. There's movement. There's an expanse that's happening. And you understand that as you stretch something out, as it expands out, things are going to move apart from one another. General relativity predicted an expanding universe. The fact was confirmed by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Hubble observed that all the galaxies are moving away from us, and he correctly deduced that if the galaxies are moving away now, that means they were closer together before. In fact, going back to the very point of beginning, he says that all of the matter in the universe originated from a single point. It's important to understand that the beginning point was not a dense point of matter like some kind of super dense pellet. It was literally nothing, no space, no time, and no matter. And boom, it existed and was thus expanding from that point. So this is Edwin Hubble discovered this, that the universe is in fact expanding. So we move on to the R here, the radiation afterglow. The radiation afterglow. This is the radiation from what is called the Big Bang. Again, the Big Bang that we believe in is that God said it, and bang, it was there, okay? It came into existence. Good scientific theories often predict future discoveries. In 1948, scientists predicted that there would be heat left over from the Big Bang explosion. So they're saying, if the Big Bang is true, if there was a point of origin, if the universe is not infinite, then there would be heat there. There would be some sort of source of heat, evidence of heat from that point of origin. Of course, they're saying this from a skeptical point of view in 1948. However, none of the smoking gun to the there was none found. None of this heat was found. The smoking gun is what it's been called to the Big Bang until two scientists discovered it by accident in 1965. So this point right here, the radiation afterglow, is actually referred to as the smoking gun for proof of the universe having a starting point. This is evidence that just nails it down, that there had to have been a starting point. The Nobel Prize-winning discovery of the radiation afterglow was made by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson working at Bell Labs in New Jersey. The radiation afterglow has the patterns of wavelengths exactly consistent with the heat and light produced from a great explosion. It's fascinating. The steady state theory claims that the universe is an eternal steady state, that the universe did not have a beginning. And here's what the agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow, I quoted him before last week. Here's what Robert Jastrow wrote about the steady state theory after the discovery of the radiation afterglow. Listen to this. He says, no explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. He says the clincher, which has convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, interesting that he would use a Bible reference there, the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in a great explosion. Supporters of the steady state theory have tried desperately to find an alternative explanation, but they have failed. At the present time, the Big Bang Theory has no competitors. Robert Jastrow wrote that in a book or in a writing titled God and the Astronomers. They've come down to this point. Then we move into the great galaxy seeds. The great galaxy seeds. The great galaxy seeds, as discovered here, scientists have found that slight variations, or what we would refer to as ripples, in the temperature of the cosmic background radiation that Penzias and Wilson had discovered, these temperature variations are extremely precise. These temperature variations are so precise, they are 1 part in 100,000. That's very precise for those of us that are not big scientific people. Which some astronomers say allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. This evidence shows that the Big Bang was not a chaotic random explosion. It was a highly fine-tuned explosion, as if someone was guiding it along. Well, I wonder who that was. Some atheists claim that if macroevolution is true, which it's not, as we'll see later on, then there's no need for God, because macroevolution would then explain all of this detail. But the ripples show us that the explosion and the expansion of the universe was precisely tweaked to cause just enough matter to congregate to allow galaxy formation, but not enough to cause the universe to collapse back on itself. The pictures from the Kobe point to the existence of matter from the very early universe that ultimately formed the galaxies and clusters of galaxies. This could have not been just a random explosion, but a purposeful and controlled creation that is highly fine-tuned, again, they said. So a designer was necessary, they say, for the creation of the universe long before life existed. And so this is that Kobe satellite. This is actually a guy that wrote a book on what they found, these galaxy seeds. And it's interesting to note, Stephen Hawking is quoted on the cover of this book, and it says, the scientific discovery of the century, if not all time. Interesting that the atheist astronomer Stephen Hawking would claim this as the greatest discovery, but it points to there had to be a creator. There had to be a cause, a causer, in order to have all this begin and all this happen. So that's the G, the great galaxy seeds. Then we move to Surge, Einstein's general relativity. Einstein's theory of general relativity shows that time, space, and matter are correlative. That is, they are interdependent. They came into existence together. Since all of nature was created, the cause must be beyond nature. Think about this. Nature cannot create nature because something had to create nature. I know that sounds like a tongue twister there, but the logic is sound. You had to have something that was supernatural, someone supernatural, in order to start nature. All of nature was created. The cause must be beyond nature or supernatural. In other words, since the cause can't be made of matter or in space-time, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. All characteristics of God. All pointing to God. This is the general theory of relativity that we have here. In summary, this surge evidence, and there's Einstein looking through Hubble's telescope. We recognize Hubble by the pipe that he was smoking in the original picture. There he is looking through this, studying this. Again, Einstein did not want to believe that the universe was finite, that the universe had a beginning. He wanted desperately to find that the universe was eternal, but his findings led him to what we know as the theory of general relativity. In summary of this, the surge evidence shows that time, space, and matter came into existence together. In other words, the universe exploded into being out of nothing. Scientists call this the Big Bang. Theologians call creation out of nothing ex nihilo. What they're calling the Big Bang, we're giving credit to God for. And even the scientists, they don't want to say it was God, but they'll go far enough to say there was supernatural involvement. They're willing to say that there was supernatural involvement. Now, there are still people out there, and I debated whether or not to put this video up on here, but there are people out there who try to explain that we get something out of nothing because nothing is something, and it's so confusing. He sounds confused just talking. It's a very interesting video to watch. But as we look at it and we're thinking about it, because we're coming at this from a Christian perspective, so we see scientific proof of the universe had to have a beginning. This all had to start from a certain point. This had to come from nothing into something, ex nihilo. Where do we find this? Well, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Psalm 33, verse 6. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. So here we have verses of Scripture that speak to God creating. Everything came from God, speaking it into existence. Then we come back to our friend Robert Jastrow. He's the founder of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies. And Robert Jastrow makes, again, some great statements here. He says, astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element of the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. This is in his book, God and the Astronomers. This a man who did not believe in God, did not believe in God, did not believe in the biblical account. For all intents and purposes, he was an atheistic agnostic at best. An atheist. But then he comes and he makes a statement like this after the findings and the research that he has seen. Speaking of, that's Saturn, an infrared image of Saturn there. Astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, and they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. We have a planetary lover back here. Again, this is the agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow saying this, and he says this, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. It's fascinating to see these men making these kinds of statements. But let's not leave it there. Let's look at what some Nobel Prize winners state about the beginning of the universe. Here's Arno Penzias, one of the guys we talked about earlier. He said, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. He said, if all I had to go on was the Bible, what I discovered was what that would have taught me and told me. Robert Wilson, his partner in this study, said, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. And then George Smoot, another astronomer here, said there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang and an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. This is the guy that wrote the book that Stephen Hawking said that this was probably the greatest discovery of all time. The Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. They're parallel. They are one and the same is basically what he's saying. So they've come down and they have discovered or they have uncovered that what we have been saying all along, that the Bible stating that God existed or created the world and the universe from nothing at a point in time, they're saying that's now true. These great astronomers, these revered astronomers, these people who made scientific altering discoverings that shaped what we know about the universe today, this is what these men are saying. So this brings us onto another level of the cosmological argument, the Callum cosmological argument, which states that an infinite number of days has no end. Makes sense, that's why it's infinite. But if we think about it, today is the end day of history, as of right now. Because as far as we know, we don't know if there's going to be a tomorrow. Therefore, because today is the end day in history, there were not an infinite number of days before today. The universe had to have a beginning. So let me say it like this, because this is a very confusing thought. This can be a very confusing thought to wrap your mind around. If the universe is infinite, if the universe had no beginning, we would never have today. Today would always be yet to come, potentially. If there was an infinite, we're always sometime in that infinity. But because we have today, there had to have been a beginning. There has to be something to mark to this point in time. We can think of it like this. This is a philosophical evidence that the universe had a beginning. So you have present, and then it comes up, and we had yesterday, we had the day before yesterday, we had last week, and so on into the past. If the universe were infinite, we would never make it here. We would never make it to the present. We would never make it to today. This is one of those thought processings that can, if you try to wrap your mind around it, it's going to hurt a little bit. But it makes sense. The philosophical, if there's infinite, there's nothing to count, there's nothing to delineate anything from the next. Who's to determine what's a day and what's not a day, what's a week, what's not a week, what's a year, what's not a year? We wouldn't have that standard to go by because the universe is infinite. But because we can say this is today, yesterday was yesterday, tomorrow is going to be tomorrow, there must have been a beginning point. We have to have a place to start. Again, this takes what we've all said, this cosmological argument, this takes it and puts it on a philosophical level. So those of us that didn't take philosophy in college, we're the ones going, what? Right now. So there must be a beginning to time if we have today. There has to be a beginning to time. The New Testament states that time had a beginning. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 7, we speak of God's secret wisdom, the wisdom that has been hidden, that God had destined for our glory before time began. There was a beginning there. 2 Timothy 1:9, grace which is given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. Titus 1:2, the hope of eternal life which God, again, promised before the beginning. The Bible speaks to a starting point. There must have been a starting point for all of this to have happened. So we've seen the cosmological argument. We've seen this philosophical argument, the Callum argument here. The evidence that the Serge and Callum cosmological argument shows that the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. The evidence is there. So let's look quickly this evening at as what the Bible said. We saw the Bible statements here, these verses. I just read through these just a few moments ago. And then, of course, we have the Jude 1:25, that before all time there was a beginning to time. So we're going to look here now at an argument for a theistic God. We're going to look at an argument for a theistic God. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. It leaves us with the following options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. This is the either or that's posed. You're either going to believe no one started it or someone started it. And so this is one of those thoughts. Which view is more reasonable to us? Which one's more reasonable to you? Well, to me, it's more reasonable to state that someone created something out of nothing than it is to say no one created something out of nothing. There had to be a cause. So if there's no God, then why is there something rather than nothing at all? This is the question that we would ask to atheists. If there is no God, then why is there something rather than nothing at all? The argument then for the theistic God is this: God is spaceless. And we've already seen that you had to have a spaceless, a timeless, immaterial being. Well, we know that God is spaceless. We know that God is timeless, according to Scripture. And even if you don't believe God, supernatural forces, that which is above nature, that would cause this, as all these astronomers have stated, would have to say, and did say, that it would be a spaceless, a timeless, an immaterial being. The Bible would go on and say that He's a powerful being. He would have to be in order to start all of this. And then He'd have to be an intelligent being. So it couldn't just be some nebulous thing out there that, boom, made all of this. There had to be a powerful and intelligent being, God, who could put all this into place. We saw in these studies just a few minutes ago the preciseness of the measurements that were being made, pointing to the fact that there had to be a design. There had to be a designer. And we believe, we hold to an intelligent design position. God intelligently designed everything that we see, everything that exists. We go back to this statement that we have here. And here's Stephen Hawking. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. There was a start. We ask the question, who is the theistic God? Who is this? Evidence shows that the universe had this beginning and thus needs a cause. There had to be this beginning. Universe, time itself has a beginning. Who caused it? The argument that we can see is the first cause, that spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful, and intelligent supernatural force. These are the attributes of a theistic God, identified without reference to the Bible. I can use that statement. There had to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful, and intelligent being or force, that first cause, the unmoved mover, if you will, without even pointing to Scripture. I haven't even gone into the Bible about that on this with these points yet. It doesn't necessarily mean what it means here is that we have a theistic God. We have a theistic God. The God of the Bible is described in those terms: spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful, intelligent. We can read all through the Psalms about Him in those aspects. And if an atheist comes along and says, well, who made God? How would you answer that, atheist? Because that question is going to get asked. Who made God? The law of causality does not say that everything needs a cause. It says that everything that comes to be needs a cause. So, if God is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, personal, He doesn't have to have a cause because He's spaceless and timeless and immaterial. It's everything that comes to be. I came to be, you came to be. Everything that comes to be has to have a cause. Not everything in the universe. God didn't come to be. No one made God. He is unmade. And since God created time, He must be timeless, supernatural. He must be above nature. A timeless being does not have a beginning and thus does not need a cause. The universe, however, did have a beginning and thus needs a cause. Before the discovery of the Big Bang, atheists had no problem asserting that the universe was eternal and didn't need a cause. So why do they have a problem with an eternal, uncaused God? They had no problem with an eternal, uncaused universe. Why is there a problem with an eternal, uncaused God? And there again, that leads us back to our quote here by Mr. Hawking. Now, some atheists would claim that we're committing the God of the gaps fallacy when we conclude that God created the universe, and that's not true. We're not plugging God into a gap in our knowledge, but we're simply following the evidence where it leads. We don't simply lack a natural cause for the universe, but we have positive evidence for a supernatural cause. So, this God of the gaps reasoning, they would claim, is that when you have something you can't answer, you just fill it with God. You just stick God in those gaps, and that fills in all of the cracks in your logic or your reasoning. And that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're taking the facts that we know, and we're taking those to lead us to the evidence that there must be God. One atheist accused the author here, Frank Turek, of this at the University of Michigan, and I'll relay this to you. The atheist said, if you give us enough time, science will find a cause of the universe. Atheists have said this with regard to evolution and a lot of things in order to prove evolution. And one atheist made the statement, given enough time, anything is possible. Well, that's pretty arbitrary, don't you think? And you wonder why, in my lifetime, it's gone from millions of years to billions of years to... So they just keep increasing the time, because given enough time, anything's possible, which now gives them the license to put however much time on it they want. Given enough time, science will find a cause. To which Frank Turek responded, first of all, that sounds a lot like faith. And second, you will never find a natural cause for all of nature. The cause of nature cannot be nature itself. To say what you're saying would be like saying, if you give me enough time, one day I'll discover how I actually gave birth to my own mother. To take the logic, given enough time, we will find the cause of the universe. That's as reasonable as me saying, if given enough time, I'll one day discover how I actually gave birth to my own mother. And that's ridiculous to say. That's completely, highly illogical. There's no evidence of this. It violates all sorts of laws of logic to make any kind of statement like this. And indeed, saying that science will find a natural cause is actually a natural law of the gaps. And it's also a faith position. In fact, it's a blind faith position because we will never find a natural cause for all of nature. Nature itself was the effect, so nature cannot be the cause. There must be a cause. What is that cause? More specifically, more accurately, who is that cause? And according to the science that we've seen tonight, and the proclamations from people who are agnostics and atheists who have done the scientific research, there must be a supernatural force, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial being, powerful to do all this. That sounds an awful lot like the God of the Bible. And this is we're just barely scratching the surface on here, and I'm leaving out the whole section on how old is the universe. All we know is in the beginning, God created the universe. When was the beginning? When God began it. When God started it. We don't know exactly when that was. People can make presuppositions and things about, and the young earth creationists, and there are actually old earth creationists and all of this. We don't know exactly when the earth was created, and you can point to geological formations. Listen, I've been to the ICR things, and I've sat under Ken Ham, and I've done all that, and I'm so thankful for their work and what they are doing. But what I do know for a fact is God created the world. There was a beginning. When exactly it was? It could have been 6,000 years or so. I can't go on a calendar and say, here it was, day one. I'm not able to do that. I know there was a beginning, though, when God created. There had to have been. Science tells me that there was a beginning. The Bible tells me there was a beginning. Logic tells me there was a beginning. So I'm going to hold to the fact that there's a beginning based on the evidence that is clearly seen here tonight. So I hope this has helped. There was a lot. I know there was a lot of thick stuff that we discussed this evening. Does God exist in the beginning? Absolutely. Absolutely, God exists in the beginning. I hope this has been a help to you and encouragement to you, challenged you. Again, it's much better explained than I could have done it in this book. I highly recommend you get this book. It's been a huge help to me personally, so I highly encourage that one. So let's move on tonight from this into our prayer time this evening, and get our prayer request up here on the screen. Ken's getting us off trying to get us off the live stream there.